Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. So today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a different video. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. This is partially inspired by David from The Poptimist. He did a video talking about some long form journalism basically that he has been enjoying recently. This video is a little bit old now. I will have a link to it down in the description as well as in the card so you guys can check it out. And if you aren't watching David already, you definitely should be. But yeah, he just talked about various stories on the internet that he really enjoyed. And he also gave me a little bit of a shout out in that video, but I should probably rewind a little bit more than that. So for anyone who has been watching my channel for a very long time, knows that back in the day I used to do Friday favorites videos, and my Friday favorites would be whatever I felt like talking about. It would be music or television or stories, not books, but news article type stories, or products or whatever I felt like talking about that week. I didn't do it every week. I probably get around to it twice a month, which was a good amount of time for me to be able to accumulate enough interesting things to talk about. But then eventually I stopped doing it just because time, and eventually I changed my video schedule. I used to do Tuesday, Thursday videos. I switched to just doing Friday videos because I started doing book riot videos. Fast forward a little bit and I discovered the wonderful world of tiny letters where people are sharing personal essays and whatnot through email newsletters. And I enjoy that, but I am not the type of person to just openly write about my life for the public to consume, at least not anymore outside of my live journal days, but that was all anonymous, so maybe that's why I felt safer. Anyway, this is a huge tangent. I started a tiny letter called 5 on Fridays, and it's literally what it sounds like. I would highlight 5 different things. One of them was usually slightly more personal, but not always. One of them was always music related, but I really love doing that newsletter, and a lot of you guys signed up for it, and I haven't been able to do it since I started my new job because 5 on Fridays was basically the result of me having too much free time at my old job. So I started putting together these newsletters, which just goes to show you how great boredom can be. So yeah, since I started my new job, it's literally impossible for me to work on these things. Not impossible. Right now, it's not feasible for me to work on these newsletters, despite the fact that I really, really want to. The amount of just time and energy that it takes, I can't justify doing it. Part of me always plays around with the idea of starting a Patreon, and if I ever did that, which I don't plan on doing it by the way, but if I ever did, bringing back my tiny letter would be one of the first perks, just because I miss doing it and that would be an easy way to motivate myself to do it. This video is going to be kind of like an homage to a 5 on Friday. I'm going to do a 5 on Friday, except this is probably not going to go live on Friday. I'll have links down in the description to all of the articles that I'm going to talk about. They are all going to be articles. I won't be discussing anything music related or anything along those lines, just because it's the end of the year and I haven't been listening to anything new. And also I could probably do a whole separate video on music stuff if that's a thing that interests you. Also, if you enjoy these types of articles and hearing these types of things from me, you should probably follow me on Twitter, because that's basically where I share all of the interesting things I come across, or at least 80% I would say of the interesting things that I come across. Follow me on Twitter. There is a link in the description, as well as to all of my other social media. Okay, so the first story I'm going to link to is a Wall Street Journal story, and it's called How Dollar General Became Rural America's Store of Choice. And it's an amazing piece of long-form journalism that looks at the lack of economic growth in rural parts of the United States and how dollar stores are basically capitalizing on this, and how it basically becomes the only means by which many of these places are able to get a lot of goods and services, or goods, I shouldn't say services. In this piece, the Dollar General basically admits that their target audience are people who make less than $40,000 annually, and how that demographic is growing, and so therefore they are becoming more profitable, which is the most depressing statistic if you think about it. And the thing about this is that a lot of times, if you think of it as a cost per unit sort of situation, a lot of times dollar stores aren't necessarily the best option. But the problem is that the best option is often to buy things in bulk if you can. Not always, but a lot of times. But the problem is it requires you to have more money up front, which is a thing that a lot of people who don't make a lot of money can't feasibly do. It's easier for them to scrape together a couple of dollars than it is for them to scrape together, $20, even though it's cheaper in the end to pay the $20. It's this really interesting look at poverty in modern United States. I think that a lot of times it's easy to focus on poverty in cities, and it can be easy to ignore rural poverty and how different it is, and how to deal with it is completely different as well. It's a really, really fascinating piece in my opinion, and it's sort of like this lens at this one specific store, but it actually is a discussion on a much larger topic, which is basically how rural America is like suffering very significantly. Next is a New York Times interactive video piece thing. It's a series called Interneting with Amanda Hess, and basically what she does is she talks about various internet trends and topics. They're relatively short, but I really enjoy her sort of point of view on a bunch of different topics. The most recent episode, or at least I think it was the most recent episode, is called The White Internet's Love Affair with Digital Blackface, and it basically talks about how a lot of times GIFs, and specifically like reaction GIFs, are often of Black people, and how it can be sort of problematic to characterize Black people in this way, and how it sort of reinforces certain stereotypes in our minds. It's a really interesting piece and perspective in my opinion, and one of the things I really like about it is Amanda Hess not only like presents this sort of problem or idea, but she also isn't necessarily saying that like just because you're a white person who has shared a GIF of a Black person doesn't mean that you're like an outright racist, but there are problematic things happening there, and it requires maybe more attention that it necessarily gets. So really great video series on the New York Times. I highly recommend it. Next is an oral history of this time that the Chicago Sun-Times bought a bar for like a piece of investigative journalism. It took place in 1976, and this group of reporters from the Chicago Sun-Times, which is a daily paper here in Chicago, basically wanted to highlight the corruption that was happening specifically with government workers in like the food and service sort of industry. So Pam Zeekman was this really well-known investigative reporter who was known for going undercover to reveal various things. So she was able to convince the Chicago Sun-Times to give her the money to be able to buy a bar here in Chicago in order to highlight any sort of corruption that they came across while in the process of like putting out this bar. And so it's a really fun piece that just highlights sort of like the really great investigative journalism that can take place when the right journalists are given the right resources and time and abilities to do these sorts of things. I don't know if it's just because I was a journalism major and I find these things like super interesting, but I thought it was a really fun piece, and again, link down below. The next piece is an opinion piece from the New York Times that I found to be just really fascinating. It's about like lost Einsteins, and it's this nickname given to kids who are often poor here in the United States, who are really smart, who are unable to become innovators or inventors merely because of their class status. Basically, they don't have the money to do these things. In this story, they highlight how kids from lower income families who test highly on like math and science are no more likely to become inventors than higher income kids who score extremely low on math and science tests. There's this idea here in terms of like the great American dream, in terms if you like have the brains and the willpower that you can achieve anything. And I think that studies like this are really good at breaking that sort of idealization of the world that we live in, and highlights how poverty and economic means has a huge impact on whether or not a person is able to become something more, something great in this sort of innovative way. Like becoming an inventor has a high amount of risk, and unless you have the means to take that risk, it's very unlikely that you're going to try or even like be able to see the ability to do that. It also points out the racial disparities happening here as well, which I thought was just great. All right, and the final thing I'm going to highlight is a blog post from Austin Kleon, who is a writer, artist. I actually have a couple of his books, literally right behind me. Steal Like an Artist, Show Your Work. These are fantastic books, especially if you are creative in any way, shape, or form. Anyways, I love following him on Twitter. He shares really great things. His blog is also fantastic. He just posted relatively recently a post called The Artistic Recluse, and it highlights the narrative that we impose on artists to become recluses. One of the reasons why I like following Austin Kleon is because he really breaks down the sort of stereotypes that we might have about what artists or writers or creatives or whatever should be or should look like or should be doing or anything along those lines. And he highlights the fact that we all sort of work differently, and a lot of the ways that people used to work aren't really feasible anymore. In The Artistic Recluse, he talks about how a lot of times what we think of as being a recluse, they often weren't. Like, he highlights how Thoreau didn't like live in the woods by himself like for eternity. Like, he lived there for a specific period of time, and even during that period of time he saw people and engaged in like dinner parties and things like that. He also talks about how it requires a lot of privilege to become a recluse. Like, you need the means to be able to live on your own. So yeah, it's a really fantastic blog post. If you aren't following Austin Kleon already, highly recommend it. And also pick up his books, they're great. So yeah, those are my 5 things that I'm going to highlight in this video. Leave a comment down below letting me know maybe some interesting articles or stories that you've been reading recently. I'm always looking for more things to read because I have an insatiable appetite for great journalism or just interesting journalism. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.